Good evening, everyone. Good morning, wherever you are. This Hangout is about digital intimacy. And we are going to dive into what digital intimacy is and how it affects our life. Just the intro. We're going to have a few more coming up. But before we get started, I want to welcome everyone. And please leave in your comments all your questions right there below the Hangout. Let us know where you're hanging out from. And if you want to join us in the stream, just let us know and we'll invite you. So, we're talking digital intimacy with the wonderful Dr. Marc Gafni from the Center of Integral Wisdom. Hi, Marc.
Hey, Yifati. Good to be with you.
Good to be with you. And I would love to hear for everybody, what is digital intimacy? It's a project of yours. How did that come to happen, come to be?
Let's get digitally intimate. Here we go. Okay. The digital intimacy, which is a project that Yifat, you and I are partnering in, which is very exciting, comes from this notion where I kept hearing from people all these critiques of the web, of the virtual world. And I think we've all heard the critiques, and they're real, they're important. It's depersonalizing, it's alienating, it's replacing true relationship, it's not face-to-face, and this kind of litany of the destructions wrought by the web. And again, many of them are legitimate critiques. I mean, are our Facebook friends really friends? I'm not sure. Could you call them when you're in trouble? Not clear, right? So there is real alienation on the web. You can't quite feel the person in a certain way, we're told. And so I really heard that whole critique, but I actually found it in some way not helpful because the web's not going away. It's not like, okay, let's critique the web. Let's critique automobiles. I mean, we shouldn't have cars. Let's get back to this horse thing. The horse and buggy thing was really working. That's just not helpful. So the question is, how do you make an automobile that's sleek, beautiful, safe, effective, right? So how do we actually find and enact a World Wide Web that's not alienating? And I first began to talk about what I called digital intimacy. That is to say, how do we actually take the fate of the virtual world and then turn it into the destiny, right, of new forms, new platforms for intimacy? How do we actually create digital intimacy? And
so Marc, before you get into further, let's talk about let's talk about intimacy, right? Because that's a big world, and there are probably different nuances to different people. So when you are talking intimacy, we know it in the personal one-to-one, face-to-face touching. What do you mean by intimacy when it's online on the web?
Right. No, that's it. Well, let's start as you said, Yifati, right? Let's start with, and I apologize for using the kind of slang affectionate name of Yifati, which is really just an affectionalized form of Yifat, right? Let's start with the word, as you suggest so beautifully, intimacy itself. What's intimacy? Forget about digital. What's intimacy? So to be intimate, right, is to be open, it's to be transparent, right? To be intimate is to be seen, it's to be recognized, it's to be addressed, it's to be called, right? Intimacy implies a mutuality between people, a mutuality of recognition, a mutuality of purpose, right? A shared kind of partnering, right? A seeing of each other, right? All of those are part of intimacy, and of course, we've exiled the word intimacy to the sexual. To be intimate with someone today means you've been sexual with them, but actually it's not about sexuality, it's about intimacy in every dimension, in every part of life. So we're all craving, seeking, yearning for intimacy. And in some sense, everything we do in our lives is in order to realize that intimacy, from our work to our relationships, to our creativity. So if we're spending all this time in the digital world, we need to actually figure out, okay, well, how does the digital serve intimacy, right? How do we create digital intimacy? So that begins to we're just kind of setting up our conversation here.
Well, you brought up a good word that brought in something that I don't think is intimate. So you said intimate is also being seen and being heard, right? And the web gives you such exposure, you can be seen by thousands and not be intimate with them.
Right. So being seen, when I say being seen, I don't mean to be physically seen. I mean to be seen, to be recognized, right? To be seen in the deep sense, as in, remember the movie, if we can date ourselves from a few years back, Avatar, when they say, I see you. Right? So it's this kind of I see you. I meaning I see you, I recognize you, I hold your vulnerability, I can witness your surrender, I share your dreams, I care about your vision and passion, right? And I can actually have, and here's the second part, maybe we can start here, I can actually have an experience. I can actually have an experience of us being intimate together, of us being connected, of us not being alienated, of us being in the space together, right? So that's the experience of intimacy. And the question is, can we create digital intimacy, forums for intimacy online? So let's look at the opposite side for a second. Where does intimacy not work online? So here's just a good example. Everybody knows that there's an enormous amount of flaming or anonymous flaming or flaming using a pseudonym, you know, an alias on the internet. People say stuff that they wouldn't dream to say anyplace else. They hurl accusations, words, information, which they would never do at a community meeting. When they were meeting with the people from their local church or synagogue or community center, where they were actually responsible to the community. These were people they had to interact with, right? Because they'd get thrown out of the community. But on the internet, people allow themselves forms of behavior that an actual face-to-face community wouldn't allow. So that's the shadow of the internet, right? What we're saying is, how do we actually create standards? How do we actually invite intimacy, which includes vulnerability, it includes responsibility, it includes integrity, right? And actually shaping the new vision of the internet as a place of intimacy, right, is our cultural invitation and challenge, and we can't rely on the Google geeks to do it, you know, with all due respect, right?
Well, we're doing a great job. I don't know what you're talking about.
Exactly my point, right? You know, we can't rely on the Google geeks to do it because they're thinking about technology. And what excites Google is we've got a new technology, we've got a new way for people to be, right, in contact, but they're not thinking about the thickness or the quality of the contact, about actually what the cultural effect is, what the spiritual effect is, what the social effect is, what the psychological effect is. I mean, all of these need to be taken into consideration as we unpack, right, this digital world, which is our future.
So here's an interesting thought that came to mind after you said that we need to be ourselves more transparent. Some of the biggest connections that happen online before the days of Hangouts, before the day of video chat and Facebook, happened in forum with pseudonyms where people were able to talk about either their addictions or their relationships and hide behind that anonymity that gave them the permission to be transparent without anyone ever knowing who they really were. So are we losing that kind of thing with the real names and having to have our faces on camera and everybody knows exactly who our profile is and who we are?
Yeah, I mean, there's no question that anonymity, right, allows for a certain kind of sharing, right, that putting my name on it doesn't allow for. The problem is that it can't create genuine intimacy, because the whole point of intimacy is for me to be seen and for me to see, right? So it might be constructive therapeutically and create a kind of therapeutic intimacy to share my issues with 10 other people and get feedback, and I want to really kind of honor the value in that, but ultimately it's a face-to-face, person-to-person connection, right, that I'm responsible to, right, that actually requires that I show up fully, right, that I actually think carefully about what I say, because otherwise there's no check on the system, right, and there's no check on the internal system. So I think ultimately, you know, while there's room for anonymity, and that's a choice that people can definitely make, right, ultimately, I mean, here's a great example. Let's talk about sexual intimacy, right? There was a huge explosion of anonymity, right, you know, let's say in the gay world, you know, in the bathhouses of San Francisco, right, which was beautiful in many ways, and then that movie Milk kind of captured the beauty of that moment in time. You know, there's a really beautiful moment. And what's happened is, as the community's evolved, there's been more and more of a desire for face-to-face, right, and that's for connection, for knowing your name, right, and actually those are two kinds of sexuality, right, you know, one is anonymous, and it has its dimension of intimacy, but ultimately a sustained intimate relationship requires direct connection. And so in digital intimacy, we have to actually start taking responsibility for who we are online in the same way we take responsibility for who we are right in the rest of the world. And online can't be a kind of, get out of jail free card, right, for everything to emerge, which is actually non-intimate and destructive. We need to actually invite intimacy, and here's the next big step, and maybe we can talk about this now, right? We need to invite the sorts of intimacy that are not possible offline. It's not just that we want to be intimate unlike we are offline. Actually, the online world invites new possibilities of intimacy, new horizons of intimacy, new potentials of intimacy that actually aren't available. So, for example, you have a relationship with some people on this Google Hangout. Now, some of them you haven't met, and yet you can feel in the quality of your interaction before the Hangout started that there's some intimacy, there's some connection. Now, you wouldn't have that connection, right, without the digital form. So the digital world has created, right, a dimension of quality of intimacy that wouldn't have been previously available, right? And you can actually get to know someone really well, right, in the digital world. I mean, in the same way that, people used to get to know each other really well by writing letters for 6 months before they met, right? So there's lots of, and I'd love to explore with you what are the possibilities of intimacy and to kind of really unpack those together.
So, I'm a Google diehard kind of person. So I see intimacy and all that stuff happening through Hangouts, through what we're doing right now. And I think that the way that Google set up Google Plus is an amazing way that they have managed to duplicate offline life and bring them online. Because who we meet online right now through Google Plus are the people that we have something in common with. We're passionate about something, and that connects us, not the school we went to or the family we were born to or the work we're doing. We are connecting on something deeper, which is our passions, and we are able to connect because that's how Google works. You search for what you want, and they give you the results. And so the results that you're getting through Google Plus are friends or people, and through their conversation, you get to know them through their comment, through the interactions, and then you take that level of text and you bring it into face-to-face in a Hangout, and then you move it further to what we call hurling, which is Hangout in real life. And that type of meeting online, getting into the face-to-face video kind of thing, where to me this is comfortable intimacy, because you start getting too close and I'd be like, okay, I can just close the browser and disappear, right? Whereas in real life, you get too close, it's like, I'm right there, what can I do? So that level that the technology allows us to meet people worldwide, right? Not physically connected to us, but connect with them on such a deep level that then brings us to the real life interaction is something that I'm fascinated. I don't know how Google created that.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. So let me that's great, Yifat. So let me just try and double click on a couple of things here, and double click being an intimate metaphor from the world of computers. So one, just explain to me a little bit more about how Google Plus works, right? Meaning the way a person adds to your circle of Google Plus is because Google sees that they've done similar searches to you?
No, so the same way in real life, if you just move into a new city, you need to let the people around you know who you are and what you do, right? So you need to let them know, hey, I'm a philosopher, I'm a techie guy, I'm something, right? You let the community know who you are, and then the community says, oh, I really wanted to meet the techie guy. I really wanted to philosophize with someone. So when you come to Google Plus, you have to set up your profile first, otherwise Google would not know how to suggest you to people.
So when you set up your profile, does then the Google algorithm then kind of send people suggestions, you should join this dude?
If you are setting up your profile and you're putting all your keywords, all your sentences, and then you are starting to talk, right? You post and share information. If you are an expert baker, and this is what you do on your daily life, your post and the language will communicate that. You don't have to fake it, right? If all I do is talk about Google, then all my posts and all my conversations and all my comments will be Google. So then Google knows when someone says, hey, I am looking for a Google expert, they'll be like, oh, Yifat describe herself like that, she's talking about it like that, and the community says she's like that because they're sharing her, and they say, hey, if you need an expert, that's Yifat. So all that together allows someone to find you. Mostly if you write about that content, then people will find you.
Right. Now, does Google make the connection, or do people make it themselves?
People can make them themselves. Yeah.
Right, and it's people, you know, but in other words, how do you show up, just technologically, right? In other words, I keep seeing people every day saying, you know, this person has been added to your Google Plus circle, right? How does that happen?
So you have someone working on your profile, so it's a little different. But for the regular user, you, if I added Paul, then Paul had added Linda, then I might get a notification saying, hey, you and Paul have someone in common. Linda, you might want to look into her profile and add Linda to your circles as well. So it will bring the suggestions based on the relationship that I already have. So it's kind of like, this is the amazing thing about Google. They are now at the point where they can understand intent and meaning between words and people. So if in the past I would say, Yifat bought Marc's red car, it would not know what color is the car, who owns the car, who bought it from who possesses it. Now it's not only knowing that, it also understand, like, predict what would be the next question. So it's called a knowledge graph. And that knowledge graph, that web, allows Google to suggest people and topic to you based on what Google knows about you, which is why it's really important for businesses to be on Google+, because if they don't know you, then they can suggest you. But that's how the relationships happen.
Got it. Okay, so there's this kind of spreading intimacy through Google+, or there's this opening up of relational space, which we'll come back and talk about. But I want to focus for a second about the second thing that you said, which is you can actually modulate the degree of closeness, right? So that's actually interesting. So I want to take one example. I don't know if people are allowed on Google+ to mention, you know, the word Skype, right? You know, like, I don't know if people like Skype like that.
It's not the Skype that we don't mention. It's the F word, you know, Facebook.
Oh, I understand. Well, I'm just going to close my door for a second. Hold on 1 second. I see all sorts of people coming in. Guys, I'm doing this. Oh, so I'm going to go around that way.
And guys, if you're watching us and you want to join the conversation, let us know in the comments what you think of the conversation. Thank you, Alexandra, for participating, and Hunter. Really appreciate that. If you want to jump in, let us know. We'll invite you. And if you have any comments or questions about the stuff that we're talking about, please let us know. Mark, back to you.
So here's an example, okay? Let's take Skype. So people always talk about Skype's really alienating. You know, wow, man, Skype, like, you know, you can't hear well, and you know, there's all these problems, and it's not really like a real conversation. But actually, when you think about Skype, Skype actually exemplifies a number of key principles of digital intimacy. So, for example, when you're in Skype, you're in a frame. So because Yifat's in a frame now, like you and I had dinner in Austin not that long ago with Katie, but, you know, and it was a great dinner, but there's something intimate which is different right now, which you're in a frame and we're just completely focused with each other. So that's the first dimension of intimacy. Two is, right, just like, you know, in Skype, the same thing's true in Google+, right? I can actually look down and see how I look to you right now. Meaning I can actually shift perspectives and actually have your perspective on me in the second, which you can never do in a regular conversation. So that offers a second dimension of intimacy. Three, when you're on Skype or you're in a Hangout, right? On Skype, for example, you can write. So I can be writing, right? I can be writing, right, as we're talking, right? Writing as we're talking, kind of a big deal. So we have both the writing option and we have the talking option. So that's three. You know, four, I can decide to turn my camera, right? Right, a little background noise here. We got a whole audience here. Thanks, Sally, for coming through. Okay, okay, right. I can turn my audience. I can turn my picture on and off, right? So imagine if I'm having a regular conversation with you and I go, "Hey, Yifat, what's going on?" Can't do that, right? So I can turn my camera on and off. I can add text as I'm talking, right? I can see how you see me, right? We're in a frame together. So there's all these dimensions that actually don't exist, and I can move between talking and voice and face and text. Now, you can't in an ordinary conversation move between talking, you know, voice talking, face, and text. All of a sudden, you've got the three major means of communication available to you subtly. That's
I'll give you an example of when that happens. You and I in a restaurant. And we're both like this.
Right. Exactly. But you can really, so that just shows how Skype actually, here's the last thing I would say. There's actually what they call in kind of Vedanta and Hinduism, there's something they call subtle energy. And the subtle energy is the thickness of energy transmission that you actually feel between people. And paradoxically, I can sometimes get a deeper hit of your subtle energy when I'm with you in Google Plus than I can when we're in person. Because when we're in person, there's a lot of distraction. There's a lot of other things happening in the field. There's a lot of other energies mixed in. But I can actually touch and feel your energy, right, your subtle energy, more palpably, right, more intimately, right, in the framework of Skype and or Google Hangout than often I can in person. That's a big deal.
It is.
So all of a sudden we've introduced this revolution, digital intimacy. Oh my God. Oh my goddess.
So I love where we're going with this, but I want Linda to just ask her question about Skype and the dimensions. So Linda, unmute.
Cheers.
Cheers.
I've typed a few things in here, so which was it that you wanted me to talk about?
The last one. Are those dimensions actually distracting?
So, you know, it's interesting that you're putting your finger on listing all of these various dimensions, that each individually could be an opportunity to create intimacy, and yet what I perceive happening constantly is that people are giving 20% of their attention to the person that they're supposedly having an intimate conversation with or communication with or connection with, and 80% of their attention is double checking, did I just get texted, did I just get dinged, is there something else interesting happening in technology? When we used to go and sit with friends in a restaurant, we gave 98% of our attention to the people we were with at the table, 2% to the waiter, and something distracting had to happen in the environment for us to turn and see what was happening at another table. That was being with people. And instead, now everybody is giving 60% of their attention to, did my electronics go off? And what was it you were saying? Oh, yeah, no, that's hilarious. Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. There is no intimacy in there. There may be presence with people, but there's nothing intimate about it. There's
Linda, that's great.
I was just going to say there's enormous pretenses of intimacy throughout technology, its uses, internet, whether it's Hangouts, whether it's Facebook. In all of them, I just watched I'll go back to the F word, you know, there's this continuous perpetual stream of people announcing what they're doing with their time, whether it's food, whether it's vacations, whether it's whatever. But would they call and have dinner with the person who they're sending that note out to? No, it's this perpetual announcing all about I, me, my. And to me, again, it's postcards from all aspects of life, but that's not intimacy either. It's information. It's information behind a curtain, but it's not intimacy.
So let's take a look at this together. Okay, that's great, Linda. That's just a wonderful, wonderful comment and totally fabulous. So what happens is as follows. Being in a restaurant doesn't create intimacy. What creates intimacy is the social responsibility we take to be present in a certain kind of way in the context of a restaurant.
Yep.
What's happened is, right, in the digital world, we've actually not created a social covenant, right, a social contract around intimacy. But the problem's not technology, right? In other words, the problem is it's the way we're enacting the technology. We haven't created, right, a new set of virtues around the virtual, right, which is, of course, precisely what we need to do. Because, now let's look at it from a different perspective. Let me just take one example, okay? The amount of people who have gotten married, right, or have gone out seriously with people that they've met online is ginormous, right? I mean, every third person I meet anecdotally says, where'd you guys meet? We met online. Right now, why? Because the online dating communities have figured out ways to create fairly rapid, intimate knowing, certainly faster than you would get at a pickup bar, right? Because you got to write a profile, right? At a pickup bar, you don't sit to someone and say, hey, babe, you want a drink? Show me your profile, right? And there's this whole long process, and there's no way of actually sharing and disclosing information, right? A dating site actually created technologies of intimacy that are more effective, right, than a kind of a pickup bar, but not quite as effective as the old community in which everybody knew their parents and grandparents and great-grandparents. You kind of knew each other's families, and so we didn't get that far, but we've created this these new contexts. So what we need to do is we need to take responsibility for our intimacy online. And that's,
if I can add to that,
please.
There was a period in my life, and it was after I got out of college, where I suffered through, algebra and calculus, and you learned formulas and everything, and there were certain formulaic symbols that I used everywhere in life, which is, what's on both sides of the equation, which is, to me, that intimacy is a function of the level of intention that you put into being with another person, regardless of whether you're face-to-face. It's done through technology. It's done through those 6 months of writing letters that, were in aerograms that took 8 days each direction, which meant 2 communications a month maximum, and so on. So it really is that digital intimacy is opening up other pathways to have access to communicate with people, but there is no intimacy until there's an intention to be using that technology, using your presence through that technology in a fashion that equates to intimacy.
You just summed up the intention of digital intimacy. And as what we're saying is, we're not describing what is, we're actually downloading into the virtual space this intention. And so what we're trying to do is not describe what is. What is actually largely the critique that's been leveled is accurate. Right? And you leveled part of that critique that I began with very beautifully. Now what we're saying by coining the term digital intimacy is, we're saying, let's invite a new intention. Let's create new possibility. Let's open up the space together. And the first way we open up the space is by articulating the possibility. That actually digital intimacy is a possibility. And that's how we invite it.
What strikes me is that it's an opportunity to actually coin a new term. So, for instance, rather than digital intimacy, digital intimating, digital intending, digital something, there's the need for a new use of a word, whether it's a constructed word or whatever, that is really waving the flag, declaring, do you want to participate in that which results in intimacy?
Yeah. Amen. Amen, sister. Hallelujah. I'm there. Yeah, totally. That's great. Great conversation. Thank you.
So, Marc, here's another question. A lot of people are not comfortable with who they are, right? And so the web and the digital gives us a place to hide until we're comfortable, until we find our, maybe tribe or a few people that we are comfortable with in revealing all of who we are. So if you are calling for transparent relationship across the web, real places.
Wait. I haven't called. I've never kind of that's a focus.
No, I am.
I haven't called for transparent relationship across the web any place, right? I think I think that's really important. I think one of the intimacies that the web provides is the possibility of finding your intimate tribe, right? As Seth Godin has written about time and time again, in ways that it was harder to find your intimate tribe offline. So that's creating that's exactly what we're saying. That's great. That's a new possibility of digital intimacy. What would it be? Digital intimacy is the new potentiality of finding your tribe that wasn't available offline. That's creating new intimacy. That's great. That's digital intimacy right there. That's a possibility created by the web that didn't exist before the web. Awesome. Rock on. Digital intimacy. Yes.
So going back to my question, we're not calling anything, but okay. So are we saying that we will not be able to find our intimate tribe as long as we are hiding behind pseudonyms and profiles and stuff like that, unless we bring all of us transparently, publicly for the entire world to know?
No, we're not saying that. In other words, I think this is really important, okay? I think I'm so happy that you raised that. I'm actually always happy with everything you say because you're so brilliant and wonderful, right? But this particular one's making me happy in this moment because transparency is not an ultimate value. We've made transparency an ultimate value in the world, but actually transparency is one value. Privacy is another value, right? Those are different values. We never make one value the only value. The reason the liberal world made transparency such a big value was good. It's because people used privacy for every manner of abuse, corruption, abuse. So it said, hey man, let's get transparent. But then it swung too far in the other direction because actually privacy also creates intimacy. Privacy also creates forms of integrity. So people need to move between appropriate forms of transparency and appropriate forms, right, of privacy. And the same thing with the web, right? In other words, the shadow, right, of kind of pseudonyms is flaming. The shadow of pseudonyms is reputation bashing. The shadow of pseudonyms is, neo-Nazi sites on the web that, say every manner of thing that can show up in, the first page of your Google rankings, right? So there's lots of shadows, right, of pseudonyms. And here's one of the big advantages of them, is that actually by using a pseudonym, if you use it responsibly, I think that's what Linda said so well, right? It's not about the technology, it's about your responsibility and the way you deploy the technology. And it's kind of like we have to take responsibility for the way we deploy technology. So if I use a pseudonym as a way of trying out and expanding my persona, I'd be afraid to do it at a party, but I want to actually access dimensions of myself and try them out. Take them for a test run, right? I want to be like radically kind. I want to be deeply vulnerable. I want to be kind of totally curious, right? I want to like be kind of an outrageously loving person, right? I want to be so genuine and authentic that I could never be that way in any other forum, right? I want to give like a million like gorgeous kind of gifts of compliments, right? I mean, why does pseudonyms have to be, I'm going to be an asshole, right?
Yeah.
Right? As hello, right? Let me access, right, the dimension of myself that's gorgeous, right? That's beautiful, that I'm afraid to show up within the world because it kind of looks a little kind of hokey and crazy. Let me try and be, I want to try out being a saint. Fuck off, man. I want to be a saint. I'm going to do that now. Like, let's see how that works. Okay? I'm going to try out my angelic self, see what's happening here with my angelic self, right? In other words, what pseudonyms allow us to do is actually create intimacy with ourselves. And if we use them responsibly, and we've already listed now 4 or 5 new forms of intimacy that are possible on the web. A pseudonym allows me to be intimate by actually discovering, uncovering, and recovering dimensions of myself until I can then actually integrate them into my kind of non-virtual personality. That's pretty awesome.
I love what you are bringing up because right today we were talking about virtual reality and the Oculus Rift, and Google in the latest I/O revealed a box, like a cardboard box that you can put your phone in and just experience virtual reality. And I was talking, Paul, maybe this is applied to you as well, hypnosis. Like instead of listening to audio or everything like that, what if you build virtual worlds for yourself that you can act out the characters that you want to portray, but you haven't yet developed in your real life? What if you use virtual reality to actually self-improve?
Right. That's great. That's great. And that is a form of digital intimacy. Right? That's a form of digital intimacy with yourself. So we've already seen, in terms of the possibilities of Skype, the thickness of subtle energy, accessing your tribe, right? Meeting new actual intimate partners, intimacy with yourself. We've already seen at least 5 new forms of intimacy, right, in this conversation that are not available in the offline world. And so what we've done is we've begun to articulate an ethic, right, which says there's actually new possibilities here. Do you remember Yifati, that movie from a few months ago called Her?
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah. Right.
So here's this dude, and he is getting it on, right, with his operating system.
Kind of weird, I have to say.
I mean, it was a little weird. I understand. Well, we got to work with that. But let's let the weirdness go for a second, right? Mm-hmm. And we'll get back to it because it's worth getting back to. But here's this guy who is, there was actually a great scene. It was actually a sexual scene in the movie where he's in bed and he's talking to their operating system. And they're getting kind of more and more intimate, and their voices are getting kind of softer and kind of sexier and more romantic. And then the screen goes black for 1 second. That's the moment. Mm-hmm. And you actually, in the theater, you actually felt the intimacy. Now, unlike, kind of your classical kind of pornographic scene, you didn't see anyone, nothing was revealed. So here you've got this situation where pornography can be completely non-intimate, right? And this scene of this dude in bed with his operating system and he's talking to someone, right? And you had this sense of this thickness of enormous intimacy. I mean, that's really powerful, right? And he's basically developing this relationship right, through, so that entire movie was really about the possibility of digital intimacy. Right, there it was, and about the possibilities that were available to him in that relationship that weren't available in other relationships, and all of a sudden he finds out, and you realize that all these people are having these really cool relationships with their operating systems. Now, of course, we don't mean that we should actually replace face-to-face embodied relationship with a relationship with your operating system. What we mean is that new possibilities of depth, of being seen, of being witnessed, right, are possible. I mean, maybe last example, and then back to you. I have a friend, a close friend who was involved in the beginning of this project, Megwin White, right? And Megwin, right, does kind of catalyzing art online, and she invites people to kind of create little art projects, and people are, recording songs and writing poems, and then writing little poems to songs, and she's got this whole little community of people exchanging creatively, intimately, right, through the medium of art. Online, which is very beautiful, right? Which is not an easy possibility sitting around a restaurant, right? And those restaurant conversations where everyone's hanging out, they can be beautiful, and we don't want to lose them. We want them to live together with digital intimacy, and that's the beginning of the vision. How's that sounding, sister?
Sounds very good.
Oh my God.
So I want to go back to her for a second. Then Mark, you're next with a great question.
Please.
So in her, what was different was that it was his operating system created to serve him and solve his issues. So it wasn't kind of like another person, just a random operating system that he was trying to get together with. The entire purpose of this program was to make him happy. And she would go to the extent of, let me find a body that I can embed, just to be close to you physically. So naturally, every person would really connect and be able to be intimate with another, I would say, entity, because this was an OS, that their entire purpose was to serve them.
Well, I totally get that. Let me challenge that for a second in the delight of Talmudic, as they say in the Jewish world, debate. If you actually watch the movie carefully, what's clear is that she goes well beyond her programming. Yeah. That's the whole point of the movie. Right? That yes. She starts with her programming. He asks her name. She searches for her name in 1,000, and it comes up with a name. And then what happens is it begins with he starts teaching her. He's downloading his humanness into her. That's the first third of the movie. Then, after she's internalized that humanness, she then emerges, right, as a figure because she's accessing all this information, and then she kind of emerges separate from him. They actually emerge in a relationship. And then what she actually does is she actually surpasses him. She's actually able to go to a depth of feeling, emotion, and intimacy that's not available to him, and she says goodbye.
Right.
Right? So actually what happens is for him, what happens is all the other stuff of relationship gets out of the way, and it's really about authenticity. It's about vulnerability. It's about communication. It's about precision of communication. I mean, I know, the people, when I'm in a relationship with someone, let's say an intimate relationship or a romantic relationship, what's most exciting to me is the precision of communication. That we're being careful that every word matters, that we know how we're using a word, and we can create a field of meaning together that becomes alive in a way that's not available in ordinary conversation. And that's what he does with her. Her, literally her.
Yeah.
I mean, in the end, it turns out that she's polyamorous, and he's got to deal with that, and we'll talk about that at a different hangout, right? It turns out she's hanging out with, I think, 632 other people at the same time. But that's a different conversation for a different hangout.
It's very interesting because I would think that if this happened between two people, the way that it could work is the falling in love phase where all you want to do is make the other person happy. And then slowly you kind of learn out how the other person is working. And then a little bit of you kind of goes into them, and a little bit of them comes into you. And then you become a couple because of everything that you share together. In that movie, it was interesting because, like you said, she was like, okay, interesting, bye. thing. So
she went places that he couldn't go. I mean, that's really what happens in a couple. When one of the couple keeps evolving, the other one stops.
Yes.
But, I think we should do digital intimacy couples therapy next time. We should invite everyone on, bring your romantic partner. We'll do kind of individual work with you. Right? Yifati is going to become the Google Plus psychotherapist.
I was already listed as the top 70 profiles for love and relationships. So, just
awesome. Awesome, awesome.
So, Mark, unmute my friend. Ask your question.
Thank you. Thank
Hey.
you. Yeah, just back to Linda's point, I think she brings up a very good point about, and I don't really think about it too much, but I really miss lunches. I really missed one-on-one contact with a lot of people that, I find I don't do as much as I used to. Writing a letter is something I haven't done in years. Even, an interesting index are Christmas cards. I find that every year I get fewer and fewer Christmas cards. And it's an interesting phenomena, I think, and I think, things are changing. But with Google Plus, I think the beauty of it compared to the other platforms is that I truly feel a level of intimacy with a lot of people that I would really miss if the relationship was not there anymore. I would truly miss them.
It's beautiful.
It's just some interesting points that I hadn't had an opportunity to talk about before. But the Christmas card thing, I think, is an interesting one. I hadn't thought about at all until the thought came.
Let's talk, Mark, about this. This is like a Mark conversation. Let's talk about the Christmas card thing for a second, okay? So I think that's really true, and the lunch thing is also really true. I think these are really important things, and these are the classical critiques of the web, and I think they're valid. I think they're really valid. I think what we can ask is, I think we can take the next step, which is super cool, which is, what's exciting about a Christmas card, right? If you get a Christmas card from someone who hates you and they want it to blow up in your face, that's not so exciting, right? So what's exciting about a Christmas card is you're saying, oh, this person remembers me. Oh, they kind of care about me. Yeah. Oh, I matter to them. Oh, they took the time, and it's invested with this meaning, right? With this sacredness, with this beauty to it. And so the question is, how do we create that beauty? How do we create what Linda called beautifully that intention, right? How do we create that sacredness, right, in the realm of the digital? Like, how do we do that? And that's a great question. And how do we create digital Christmas cards that have the same quality, right, as something that you might have received, right, which is a kind of hard physical artifact? I mean, I think that's the question, and you've already begun to answer it because you said, hey, I've got all these relationships kind of in the Google Plus world that I think the word, tell me if I got it right, you said I would miss.
Truly.
Right?
Truly
Missing.
Miss them.
I would truly, when someone says I would truly miss people, well, that means I've got some intimacy with them. Right? So that's a big deal. So, and I think, again, from my perspective, and again, I'd love to hear what everybody else says. From my perspective is, one can't replace the other. We got to take both. What Yifat and I are trying to say is, let's stop demonizing the web, and let's actually claim, as you just did, let's claim its intimate possibility, right? As at the same time, we never wanted to replace the other world. We wanted to transcend and include the other world. Does that make sense?
Sure. Yeah, to enjoy both, and
yeah, totally.
And a balance, I guess, is the word. But
balance,
you bring up a good point. How we would take our relationships in Google Plus to another level, where I would write a Christmas call to Paul Ramsey, to actually physically handwrite one and mail one off to New Hampshire or whatever, because because I consider him to be more of a friend than maybe some of the other relationships that I have.
That's great.
It's important. So here's a relationship that's his impetus was on Google Plus. But as an example of somebody I would definitely add to my Christmas card list, and I think that says something.
I love it. I love it.
So to your point, how do we do that in the digital world? Because with the other platform, they have these things where you can buy. It's too tempting to buy a cup of coffee for somebody on their birthday, if you know what I'm talking about.
Right.
And I find myself doing that too. But how can we, in the digital world, what's a true gift that we can give somebody that's even better than a Christmas card, possibly?
No, I think that's a great. I love that inquiry. I don't want to answer it. I'd love to hear everybody's answer. I'm just remembering, Mark, when I went to remember that movie Dirty Dancing, like way back when with Patrick Swayze. Sure. I used to go to like I'm Jewish. We used to go to like the bungalow colonies in the Catskill Mountains, and we would go skating at a place called Fun Fair. And you'd find like the first girl to skate with you, and you'd be like all excited. And And then if you were if you were lucky, after the summer was over, she'd write you a letter. Right? I lived in Columbus, Ohio. She'd wait for a letter to get to you from Brooklyn to Columbus, Ohio. Then the question is, what kind of stationery did she choose? And then was it perfumed or not? And then the question was, did she write on the back of the letter "Swak," sealed with a kiss? And then you waited like 6 weeks for it to get there, right? There's like this whole thing, right? So how do we create? I think that's what you're really asking. How do we create that experience? You know what I miss? I miss, Mark. I miss Christmas carols. I'm a Jewish dude, but I love Christmas carols, man. They're so awesome. I miss like people gathering physically in front of your house to sing. Like, how do we enact that online? That's a beautiful inquiry. And I think that's one of the core inquiries we need to address in digital intimacy.
There are live concerts happening on Hangouts. So this is another way of, there was a conversation of whether people would be paying to watch live concerts from their home, and having a party and all that stuff, whether they'll pay just to watch it, if it was live and everything, and whether they'll pay to participate in it like they do with Hangouts. So yeah, we can get there, I think.
Yeah, amen.
Good. No, I just wanted to ask Paul to join the conversation. So, Paul, unmute.
Well, I love this. I love this whole conversation. I think it's great. I guess my food for thought. While I think that crafting a term like digital intimacy is necessary given how digital our lives are today, I'd get picky maybe, and I'd say there's no such thing as digital intimacy. Like, there's just intimacy, and I think that what people are struggling with, and I think Marc's talked about it really well tonight, is like the whole stop blaming the internet thing. Is people have an intimacy problem. They don't have an internet intimacy. They don't have a digital intimacy problem. If you really look, and Marc just talked about it, the internet isn't keeping people from sending Christmas cards. People are just more self-focused, self-obsessed, self-indulgent than they've ever been, and we could talk for hours and hours about why that is, but I think that's just a reality of our culture, and what it means is that people are just so focused on themselves that they're not focused on being present for one another. And so, to me, that's what intimacy is about, is being present for other human beings. And I like to stay optimistic, like Marc is sort of pushed for us to all be a little more optimistic. I like to be optimistic and look at these kind of platforms and say, they give us a chance to be present for people if we make the choice when we use the tool to use it in that way. And a lot of people just aren't doing that. And you've been sort of preaching that message for over 2 years now, of telling people it's not enough just to do Hangouts. You've got to do them in a way in which you're authentic and you're present for people. You've had that message for a long time. And so, I would just say, if you really want to talk about how to get around this stuff, you kind of got to go back to the foundation, and that's how do we get people to just stop having intimacy problems. So.
Love it. Because, okay, so for me, it's really interesting. It's like, it kind of feels like a little shift from going from the masculine to the feminine, right? Where we went through all these like men leading the world and marketing and sales and stuff, and now we're a little bit more images and engagement and conversation and intimacy. So are we looking at like an entire global trend that we're like moving towards the feminine more?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. Just to circle back for a second, this notion that you brought up of there's kind of this intimacy disorder in culture, which I think is completely true.
Okay, so for me, it's really interesting.
Go ahead, love.
No, that's Kristen just joined us and her video was on. Go ahead.
Hi, Kristen. Right, I think there is an intimacy disorder in culture, and what the internet allows people to do, and that's where its weakness is, and I think that's what Linda was pointing to, is to have pseudo-intimacy, right? Instead of having real eros, you have pseudo-eros. Instead of having real intimacy, you have pseudo-intimacy. And what we need to do is we need to take responsibility for genuine intimacy online. And we can actually do it, right? And we need to actually create interior kind of covenants and contracts between ourselves and really articulate a language of intimacy online. And that's why I think the word matters. The word matters is because words create new reality. That's what it does, you know. And the word abracadabra is, of course, a play on the Aramaic word avracadabra, right? I create through my speech, right? So a speech act, you know, the book of John, Logos, a speech act creates new worlds. So we need new speech acts. But ultimately, I think you're completely right. It's really about being present and being intimate. And if I actually begin to think of the virtual world of a place that facilitates that, then I've shifted my relationship to it. As opposed to being a neutral tool, right? It's a new possibility for intimacy. And especially, here's the last sentence, and I just love to hear from other people. You know, when we think about the singularity, you know, people think about, you know, what's this world in which, you know, the machine world, as it were, wakes up. You know, I have a good friend, Lana Wachowski, who made a movie called The Matrix, right? In the last scene in The Matrix, you know, the machines wake up, and you realize the machines actually are alive and intimate and conscious, and that there was actually this split between the machines and human beings. So in our singularity vision, we're talking about the machine world waking up. Well, whatever that means, right, the intimacy that we download into that world, what we do with that world, how we animate that world kind of matters enormously, right? And in some sense, if I can be kind of a little bit of an internet mystic for a second, right? You know, remember The Sound of Music, you know, the hills are alive, right? So there's, you know, this whole thing's alive. There's a living system here, and what we do with it and how we play in the system matters, right? And we need to kind of begin to kind of speak to the internet and kind of be internet whisperers, right? You know, and kind of evoke, right, the possibilities of intimacy, right, and evoke the possibilities, you know, of in-depth authenticity. So that's where Yifat and I are going, and we both got excited about this because we each approach it from a different place. But as you said, completely, Yifati's been talking about this in her own language for a couple of years. I've been talking about it, you know, for a couple of years, and we met. We said, oh, there's like this real shared vision here. Let's put digital intimacy into the world as our intimate gift, right, to this next century.
Love it. Linda had an observation. Linda, you wanna share it?
Yeah, it's interesting because it formed and then it dissipated and it's taking it's swirling in and out of form. There's an element of all of this that depends on people's age. For folks who are, I'd say, 45 and older, who had a stage of their career where they worked every day, they got up, they shared space, they shared conversation, they shared projects, they passed information back and forth, and there was a continuity of involvement. And that created the cauldron in which they could find people they identified with, choose to have the lunches, choose to build the relationships. If those relationships got dispersed because people moved on to different jobs, then you'd make dates for dinner, and you'd send Christmas cards to catch people up if they moved across the country. I look at my nieces who are in their early 20s, and I know that my niece, who works inside a company, but periodically we'll both be online in the same moment, and we'll start Google Chat, and we may chat throughout an entire day, a conversation. I know she thinks that's actually being intimate. That same young woman will stand in my kitchen looking down at her phone and talking to me this way and constantly looking if the phone goes off. If we were trying to have this conversation about intimacy, I think in large part there'd be a completely different puzzlement over what we're trying to get at. Because part of our conversation is we know what intimacy felt like, and we're grappling with how is it being dismantled by technology, enabled by technology, and so on. And the 20-year-olds have their own journey they're going to have to take to find out what intimacy looks like. Because if I ever get a, quote, Christmas card or Hanukkah card, it will because it will occur because somebody decided it was this year's fad to send concrete physical cards to everybody this year, and by next year it will be over.
Right. No, that's such a good point. And so
Mark, hold on a second. Hold on just a second, because we have someone from that generation. Alex, defend yourself.
Yeah, I put it in chat. I was like, I feel like I have to defend my generation. I'm not going to say my exact age, even though my about page says it, but I am in maybe my mid-20s, I guess. And I study communication. I study a lot of this from the communication standpoint. And according to communication, and it's not just my generation, it's people in general, we choose different avenues with people that we are already intimate with, or we call it weak ties and strong ties. People that we have strong ties with, we will choose different avenues to talk to them, whether it's, so like my sister, I talk to her all day, and I talk to her on the phone literally like every single day. I talk to her on Facebook. I talk to her in text. We talk to each other through all these different avenues. I would say that that's still maintaining an intimacy with her, especially because we're in completely different, we're across the U.S. from each other. That's how we maintain our intimate relationship. And I think that my generation I think that we are just trying to find more ways to create this intimacy that you guys had in your own way, and we're trying to find the best way to do it in the environment that we find ourselves. We find ourselves surrounded by this technology. We find ourselves inundated with new platforms to communicate on regularly. I think that we're just trying to navigate how to create those intimate relationships that the older generations had, but in a different environment.
Well, imagine that your sister, right, was living across the country, and it was 40 years ago, right? The truth is, you wouldn't have that level of relationship with your sister.
Exactly.
You just wouldn't, right? You'd be drifting off, and you'd be in different places, and that sister would be lost. And that's Rock On Sister, an awesome example of digital intimacy that actually wasn't available in the old world. Fucking A, that's awesome. That's great. That's great. And that's another example of digital intimacy. So I think we're seeing it. We're seeing it like this would not have happened, right, 30 years ago. Your sister would have gone off. Where do you live?
Right now I'm in Akron, Ohio.
Akron, Ohio, right? Rubber capital of the world. Okay, I grew up in Columbus.
Yeah, I actually live in a place called Goodyear Heights.
Goodyear, oh my God, I know. We used to do school trips to Akron. Oh my God. Now, where does your sister live?
She is in Dallas, Oregon.
Forget it, man. Dallas, Oregon, Akron, Ohio, that sisterhood's like over. They'll see each other once every 5 years, for like a Christmas. They'll write Christmas cards, but all intimacy's gone, and all of a sudden, right, these two sisters are like totally buds at doing sisterhood because digital intimacy opened up a new door. Yes, another point for digital intimacy coming at you in this world. Good.
That's wonderful. Kristen, unmute yourself. Another generation.
Ah, great. Yeah, okay, so I have a perspective coming from domestic violence, where I was prisoner in my own home for like years, and this has enabled me to have connections, just period, connections. So I definitely feel the digital intimacy, yeah.
Wow. But can we just, Kristen, can we go back, Kristen, for a second? Is that okay?
Yeah.
Ask a couple of questions, because it just seems so important. Kristen, you still there? So you were like in your own home, and without in any way kind of violating your privacy, but you were in your own home, and like you're kind of stuck there. You couldn't quite, right? And
yeah.
So and now what? So what has the digital world done for you? Just to talk about it a little bit.
Oh, okay. Well, to start with, when I was, in my other situation that I'm no longer in, we didn't have any way to reach out. We live in an area where there's no mass transportation. I had 5 children, and the 5th one was hooked up to a Joey pump, to like feeding tube.
Wow.
Like the nearest place that I could walk to is like 2 miles away, and that's like a gas station. It's a remote area. So I really didn't have, and we didn't have a phone. We didn't have a car.
You're like in Akron, Ohio.
We were isolated.
That's not true.
Wow. But now coming on, like now since I, went through a couple years of domestic violence shelters and whatnot, worked my way into society. I got myself back in school. So ASU online, that's huge, digital, right?
Yeah.
And, so school, so I'm now learning and working towards a better future. And then all of a sudden, I came across, Google Plus, and now I have a family.
Wow. Wow. Well, thank you. I mean, that just thank you, sister. I mean, that's beautiful, right? I mean, that's just an incredible testimony, right, to the possibility of creating intimacy that just wasn't available without this technology, and it's you've taken responsibility for using it in a particular way, right? And you're showing up in a way. And my guess is, and you correct me if I'm wrong, because I could be totally wrong, but my guess is by you showing up in a particular way, other people show up for you in that way.
Oh my goodness. It is amazing.
Right.
Like you
Right.
give love and you get it back tenfold.
Rock on, sister. We're gonna have a Google Plus revival digital intimacy meeting here. Right? The good book, we have scripture on this, right? But it really is beautiful. It's beautiful. Thank you. That's awesome. Yeah, thank you.
This is amazing. So we are actually, wow, what a note to end on, because we are at the hour mark. So the good thing is that this is not the last and only hangout about digital intimacy, and I would love to have you guys back with us again. So thank you so much for the time that you spent with us. And Kristen, wow, thank you so much for sharing like that. To your thoughts and everything, and the conversation will continue in the stream. So let's do that. Thank you, Marc.
Thank you, Yifat, for hosting us and creating this space, and I'm so excited to partner with you on this project. I'm delighted to meet your friends who are awesome, right? Each one of them, and I'm hoping I'm going to get some Christmas cards this Christmas, but we'll see what happens. We'll have to have a few more conversations. But thank you, everybody. What a delight.
Thank you, Marc.